Have you ever been abandoned at the exact moment you needed someone the most? Not a small disappointment, not someone forgetting to call. I'm talking about the kind of moment that changes the entire direction of your life. The kind where one sentence, one decision, breaks the future you thought you had. That moment came for me when I was 8 months pregnant, and the man who delivered it, my husband. But before I tell you what he did, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how some people promise you forever until forever becomes inconvenient? Because wedding vows sound beautiful in front of family and friends, but some people treat them like they expire after a few years. My name is Angela. 32 years ago, I believed in those vows with my whole heart. Back then, I was 24 years old, living in a small town in Ohio, and married to a man named Marcus Carter. Marcus wasn't just my husband, he was my high school sweetheart. We met when we were 16, the kind of love people like to romanticize. Friday night football games, milkshakes at the diner after school, talking about the future like we had the whole world figured out. Marcus used to hold my hand and say something that made me feel completely safe. Angie, one day I'm going to give you a life nobody in this town has ever seen. And for a long time, it felt like he meant it. After college, Marcus got a marketing job in Chicago. Within a few years, everything started changing. Nice apartment, nice car, weekend dinners at restaurants we couldn't have afforded when we were younger. From the outside looking in, we looked like one of those couples people quietly envy. But here's something life teaches you as you get older. The most dangerous storms rarely start with thunder. They start with silence. Little things. Marcus staying late at the office more often. Phone calls he suddenly took in another room. Cologne that wasn't the one I bought him. Now, if you've been married long enough, you know something about intuition. Women don't always need proof. Sometimes we just feel when something changes, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. But I ignored that feeling. You know why? Because I was pregnant, 8 months pregnant with our first child. And when you're carrying a baby, you want to believe everything will be okay. So I told myself comforting things. He's just stressed. Work must be busy. Things will settle down when the baby comes. I repeated those thoughts like a prayer until one Tuesday evening. Marcus came home earlier than usual. No smile, no hug, no, how are you feeling? Just a small leather suitcase sitting quietly beside the door. Now, I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where your stomach drops before a single word is spoken, but that night, my heart already knew. Marcus looked at me, looked at my 8 month pregnant stomach, and then he said the words that shattered my entire world. Angela, I'm leaving. But that wasn't the worst part, not even close, because the real reason my husband was walking on me involved a woman who had been sitting just 15 feet away from him every day at work, his secretary. And what Marcus said next was the moment my entire life changed forever. For a moment, I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. You know how sometimes your brain refuses to process a sentence because it simply doesn't belong in reality? That's where I was standing, right there in our living room, one hand resting on my stomach, feeling our baby shift inside me. Leaving? I finally said. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Marcus sighed the way people do when they're tired of explaining something obvious. I didn't want it to happen like this, he said. Now let me pause right there for a second. Have you ever noticed how people about to break your heart often start with that sentence? I didn't want it to happen like this. Translation? I already decided, and your feelings are just an inconvenient detail. I looked at the suitcase, then at him, then back at the suitcase again. "Are you going on a trip?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. And that's when he said the name that would echo in my mind for years. Claire. Just one word. Claire. At first, it didn't mean anything to me. Then it hit. Claire. His secretary. The young woman he had mentioned casually a few times. You know the type of mentions. Claire scheduled my meeting. Claire picked up lunch for the team. Claire helped me organize some files. Normal. Harmless. Or so I thought. I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, and Marcus finally said it. "I'm in love with her." The room went silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the heavy kind, the kind where even the air feels thick. I blinked slowly. "I'm 8 months pregnant," I said, not yelling, not crying, just stating a fact. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I know." That was it. 2 words. I know. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. He had already made peace with this decision. Days ago, maybe weeks, maybe months. He had already walked away in his mind long before he packed that suitcase. "Since when?" I asked. He hesitated. And if you've ever watched someone hesitate before answering a question like that, you already know the answer is going to hurt. "A few months," he said quietly. A few months. Which meant, while I was picking out baby clothes, while I was decorating the nursery, while I was rubbing lotion on my growing stomach and dreaming about our son, my husband was falling in love with someone else. Now, I wish I could tell you I screamed, or threw something, or delivered some powerful speech worthy of a movie scene. But the truth? Shock makes people very calm. Too calm. I just sat down slowly on the couch. "Marcus," I said, "your son is coming in 4 weeks." He nodded. "I know." That phrase again. I know. Then he said something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. Something that would replay in my mind every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone our son would reach without him. Marcus looked down at the floor and said, "I'm not ready to be a father." Now let me ask you something. How exactly does a man figure that out after the baby is already 8 months on the way? But the next thing Marcus said, that was the sentence that truly shattered everything. Because he didn't just admit he was leaving, he told me exactly who he was choosing instead. And when I heard those words, even the baby inside me seemed to go still. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at the floor like it held the courage he couldn't find in my eyes. Then he finally said it. "I'm moving in with Claire." Just like that. Simple. Clean. Like he was announcing a change of office address. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just disbelief. "Your secretary?" I asked quietly. Marcus nodded. Now, let me pause here and say something to the women listening. When a man is about to make a terrible decision, he often tries to dress it up in language that sounds reasonable. Marcus did the same thing. "It's not what you think," he said. Now, tell me something. Have you ever heard those words lead to anything good? Because I haven't. "It just happened," he continued. "We worked late a lot. She understood the pressure I was under. We connected." Connected. That word. It's amazing how people use gentle words to describe painful betrayals. Connected. As if what we had built for 8 years was just some temporary arrangement. I rested both hands on my stomach. Our baby shifted again. Maybe he could feel my heartbeat racing. "Marcus," I said slowly, "we're about to have a son." For a moment, I saw something flicker in his face. Guilt. But it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "I'll send money," he said. Send money. Like I was some kind of monthly bill. Now here's something I didn't understand at 24 years old, but understand very clearly now. Some people believe providing money is the same as providing love. It isn't. Not even close. I looked up at him. "Are you really walking on your child before he's even born?" Marcus sighed again, impatient now. "I told you I'm not ready to be a father." Then he added something that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. "Claire doesn't want kids right now. She wants us to focus on our careers." Us. Did you hear that? Us. The new us. And suddenly it became crystal clear. Marcus wasn't confused. He wasn't torn. He had already built a brand new life in his mind. One where I didn't exist. One where our baby didn't exist. And the more he talked, the more I realized something painful. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't even asking for understanding. He was simply informing me, like the decision had already been approved somewhere that didn't include me. The room fell quiet again. Outside, a car passed down the street. Life continuing like normal. But inside that living room, everything was collapsing. Marcus grabbed the handle of the suitcase. That sound. The wheels rolling across the wooden floor. It's strange what details your memory keeps. He walked toward the door, and for a moment, something inside me wanted to shout, to beg, to remind him of the years we had spent together. But another part of me, a deeper part, stayed silent. Because I realized something important in that moment. If a man can leave his wife 8 months pregnant, nothing you say will make him stay. Marcus opened the door, then he paused. Not long, just long enough to say one final sentence. "I hope one day you'll understand." Understand. I almost laughed, but before I could respond, he stepped outside, the door closed, and the sound echoed through the house like the final page of a chapter ending. Just like that, I was alone. 8 months pregnant. No husband, no plan, no idea how I was going to raise a child by myself. But what I didn't know then, what Marcus definitely didn't know, was that the little boy he had just walked away from would one day become the reason Marcus Carter would wish he had never left that door. And that moment was only the beginning. After Marcus walked out, the house felt different. You ever notice how a place can suddenly feel unfamiliar, even though nothing in it has changed? Same couch, same kitchen table, same wedding photo hanging on the wall, but the energy? Gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door he had just closed, half expecting it to open again. You know, like in those movies where the man suddenly realizes he made a terrible mistake, runs back inside, falls to his knees. "Angela, I'm sorry, I can't leave." But real life doesn't always give you those cinematic moments. That door stayed closed, and eventually the sun went down. Now, here's something funny about heartbreak. Your body doesn't pause for it. The baby still needs you. Your stomach still growls. The world keeps moving whether you're ready or not. So I stood up slowly and walked into the kitchen. I remember opening the refrigerator and just staring inside like it might contain answers. Milk, eggs, leftover lasagna. None of it mattered. Then suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach.
I froze. Another one came a few seconds later. Now listen, when you're 8 months pregnant, every pain makes you nervous. But this one felt different, tighter, stronger. And right then, a thought ran through my mind that nearly made me laugh from disbelief. Oh no, not tonight. But babies don't check calendars. Another wave of pain rolled through my stomach. I grabbed the edge of the counter, breathed in slowly. Okay, I whispered to myself. Okay, Angela, stay calm. Now, let me ask the mothers listening something. Isn't it amazing how quickly a woman can shift into survival mode? 10 minutes earlier, I was sitting in heartbreak. Now my brain was running a completely different program. Hospital bag, phone, car keys. I shuffled down the hallway toward the bedroom. Every step felt heavier than the last. Another contraction hit, and this time, I knew. This wasn't a false alarm. My son had decided it was time. I grabbed my phone and dialed the one person who had always shown up for me, my mother. She answered on the second ring. Angela? Honey? And the moment I heard her voice, all the strength I had been holding together cracked. Mom, I whispered. I think the baby's coming. There was a pause. Then her voice sharpened immediately. Where's Marcus? Now that question, that simple question, felt like someone pressing on a bruise. He's not here, I said. Another contraction came, stronger this time. My mother didn't ask any more questions. Sometimes mothers just know. I'm on my way, she said. Sit down and breathe. The call ended, and suddenly the house felt even quieter. The man who was supposed to hold my hand in the delivery room, the man who helped create this child, was probably sitting somewhere with his secretary while I was about to give birth. Life has a strange sense of timing. I slowly lowered myself onto the couch, hands wrapped around my stomach. All right, little man, it's just you and me tonight. But what happened in that hospital a few hours later, what I saw when my son was finally placed in my arms, changed the direction of my life forever. Because in that moment, I made a promise Marcus Carter would spend the next 18 years proving he never deserved. By the time my mother arrived, the contractions were 5 minutes apart. And if you've ever been through labor, you know what that means. Things were about to get serious. She burst through the front door like a woman on a mission, still wearing her house slippers and carrying her purse like it contained medical equipment. Angela, she said, rushing over to me. Another contraction hit right on cue. I grabbed her arm. Okay, that one was stronger, I breathed. My mother looked at my stomach, then back at my face. We're not waiting, she said firmly. 10 minutes later, we were in her car, speeding towards St. Mary's Hospital. The entire ride felt like a blur of street lights and breathing exercises. Breathe in, breathe out, my mother kept repeating. Now, here's something they don't always tell you about labor. It's not just physical. Your mind goes everywhere. Between contractions, my thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus. I kept wondering where he was. Was he sleeping peacefully? Laughing with Claire? Did he even know his son was coming into the world that night? Then another contraction would slam into me and pull me back into reality. By the time we reached the hospital, I could barely walk. 2 nurses rushed over with a wheelchair. First baby? One of them asked with a gentle smile. Yes, my mother answered before I could. And the father? The nurse asked casually. Now that question, it hung in the air for a moment. My mother squeezed my hand. He's not here, she said calmly. The nurse didn't push further. She simply nodded, because nurses have seen everything. They wheeled me down the hallway toward the delivery room. Bright lights, beeping machines, doctors moving quickly. The world suddenly felt very loud. Hours passed in waves of pain and exhaustion, and through it all, my mother never left my side. She wiped my forehead, held my hand, encouraged me when I thought I couldn't push anymore. "You're stronger than you think," she kept saying. And somewhere in the middle of that long night, something shifted inside me. Not physically, emotionally. The heartbreak that had been crushing my chest earlier, it started transforming into something else: determination. Because with every contraction, one thought became clearer and clearer. Marcus had walked away from this child, but I wasn't going to let that decision define my son's life. Finally, just before sunrise, the doctor leaned forward and said the words every exhausted mother is waiting for. "One more push, Angela." I gathered every ounce of strength I had left, pushed, and suddenly, the room filled with the most beautiful sound I had ever heard: a baby crying. Loud, strong, alive. A nurse gently placed him on my chest, and the moment I looked at his face, everything changed. He had tiny fingers, soft brown skin, and a head full of dark, curly hair. But what caught my attention the most were his eyes. Big, curious, almost like he was already studying the world. "What's his name?" the nurse asked softly. I looked down at him, then whispered the name I had chosen months earlier. Daniel. Daniel Carter. My son. My heart. And right there in that hospital room, holding that tiny life against my chest, I made a promise. "Daniel," I whispered, "you may not have the father you deserve, but you will always have me." What I didn't know at that moment was that this little boy, the one Marcus walked away from, would grow up to become the kind of man Marcus could never be. And 18 years later, the two of them would meet again, under circumstances none of us could have imagined. The first year of Daniel's life was the hardest year I had ever lived. Not because of Daniel. Babies cry, sure. They wake up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and sometimes 4 a.m. just for fun. If you're a parent listening to this, you already know the drill. No, the hard part was doing everything alone. Midnight feedings, doctor visits, diaper explosions that seemed almost scientifically impossible, and bills. Lots of bills. Now, Marcus did send money, just like he promised, a check every month. No letter, no phone call, no "how is my son?" Just money. And I'll tell you something I realized quickly. Money might help pay rent, but it doesn't rock a baby back to sleep at night. During the day, I worked part-time at a small insurance office while my mother watched Daniel. We didn't have much, but we had stability. And sometimes stability is more valuable than luxury. Daniel grew quickly, too quickly if you ask me. One minute he was learning to crawl across the living room carpet. The next minute he was running down the hallway like he owned the house. And from the very beginning, Daniel had something special about him. Curiosity. This boy asked questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do dogs wag their tails? Why does grandma snore so loud? Okay, that last one caused a family meeting, but you get the idea. He loved learning. By the time he started kindergarten, his teachers were already noticing. "Mrs. Carter," one teacher told me during a conference, "Daniel has a remarkable mind." I smiled politely, but inside, my heart felt like it might burst with pride, because every achievement Daniel made felt like proof of something important. Proof that Marcus had been wrong. Wrong to believe walking away would erase his responsibility. Wrong to believe this child wouldn't matter. Now, as Daniel grew older, the questions eventually changed. And if you're a single parent, you already know the question I'm talking about. One afternoon, when Daniel was about 7 years old, we were sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Out of nowhere, he looked up and asked, "Mom? Yes, baby? Where's my dad?" There it was, the question every parent in my position eventually faces. Now, you can't lie to children forever, but you also don't want to place adult pain onto young shoulders. So I chose honesty, just gentle honesty. "He lives in another city," I told him. Daniel thought about that for a moment. "Does he know about me?" That question hit a little harder. "Yes," I said softly. "Then why doesn't he visit?" Now tell me something. How do you explain abandonment to a 7-year-old? You don't, not fully. So I placed my hand over his and said something that became a truth Daniel carried for years. Sometimes people make choices they regret later. Daniel nodded slowly. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. But then he smiled and said something that made my throat tighten. "That's okay, because I still have you." And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Marcus hadn't just walked away from responsibility, he had walked away from the greatest privilege a man can have, watching his child grow. And what Marcus didn't know was that Daniel was growing into someone truly extraordinary, the kind of young man who would make an entire room turn their heads, including his father, 18 years later, when fate finally placed them face to face again. Years have a funny way of moving faster the older you get. One moment you're tying your child's shoes, the next moment you're teaching him how to drive. And before you can fully process it, he's standing in a graduation gown. Daniel grew into a tall, thoughtful young man. By the time he turned 17, he was already taller than me, which he loved to remind me about. "Mom," he'd say, leaning down dramatically, "how's the weather down there?" And I'd swat his arm and tell him to stop showing off. But the truth? I loved every second of it, because every milestone felt like a quiet victory. Daniel worked incredibly hard in school, straight A's, honor roll every year. But what impressed people most wasn't just his intelligence, it was his character. Teachers trusted him, friends respected him, and younger students looked up to him. One afternoon during his senior year, Daniel came home unusually quiet. Now, mothers develop a sixth sense about these things. Something was on his mind. "You okay?" I asked while stirring a pot of soup on the stove. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated, and suddenly I had a feeling I already knew where this was going. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked. Him. Marcus. I turned the stove down and faced my son. "Sometimes," I admitted. Daniel nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about him lately." That didn't surprise me. At 18, people start wondering about their roots, where they came from, who they resemble. "What made you think about him now?" I asked. Daniel shrugged. "Everyone at school is talking about their families coming to graduation." Ah, there it was. Graduation. A moment every parent dreams about, but also a moment that can highlight absence. Daniel quickly added, "It's okay, though. Grandma will be there, and you'll be there." I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Your father made his choice a long time ago," I said gently. Daniel nodded. "I know." Then he smiled slightly. "But you know something funny?" "What?" "You don't feel like I missed out." That sentence stopped me for a second. "Why not?" I asked. Daniel shrugged again. "Because I had you." Sometimes simple words carry the most weight. But then Daniel said something that surprised me. "Still, I do wonder what he's like." Now, let me ask you something. Isn't curiosity part of being human? Even when someone hurts us, a part of us still wonders, still asks questions. And at that moment, I realized something important. Daniel wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was simply curious. about the man whose last name he carried. But life has a strange sense of timing, because just 2 weeks later, at Daniel's high school graduation, the man who had walked out 18 years earlier would suddenly walk back into our lives. And when Marcus Carter saw the young man his son had become, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, he wouldn't recognize him. But something inside him would break the moment he learned the truth.
Graduation day arrived bright and warm, the kind of early summer morning that feels full of possibility. Parents filled the parking lot of Daniel's high school, carrying flowers, cameras, and those big, proud smiles you see when years of hard work finally pay off. My mother and I arrived early. She insisted. "Good seats matter," she said, like we were attending the Super Bowl. We found 2 chairs near the middle of the field. Students in blue graduation gowns slowly filled the rows in front of us. And somewhere in that sea of caps and tassels was my son. 18 years. 18 years of late-night homework, scraped knees, science projects on the kitchen table, and long conversations about life, all leading to this moment. Then suddenly, I spotted him. Daniel. Tall, confident, laughing with his friends. And for a moment, my heart swelled so much I had to blink back tears. "You did it," I whispered to myself. My mother squeezed my hand. That boy worked hard. The ceremony began. The principal gave a speech about perseverance. A teacher told a few jokes about how students had survived math exams and cafeteria food. Everyone laughed. But halfway through the ceremony, something unexpected happened. A man sat down in the empty chair 2 rows ahead of us. I didn't notice him at first, but my mother did. She leaned closer and whispered quietly, "Angela, don't turn around suddenly." Now, when your mother says something like that, your stomach automatically tightens. "Why?" I whispered back. She took a slow breath. "I think that's Marcus." For a moment, I thought she must be mistaken. 18 years is a long time. People change. Hair turns gray, faces grow older. But when I slowly looked forward, there he was, Marcus Carter. A little heavier, lines around his eyes, less hair than I remembered. But it was him. My ex-husband, the man who walked out while I was 8 months pregnant, sitting just 2 rows ahead of me, watching the same stage, watching the same ceremony. But here's the strange part. Marcus Carter had no idea we were there, and he definitely had no idea that the tall young man about to walk across that stage was his son. My heart started pounding. Why was he here? Did he know? Had someone told him? Or was this just one of those strange coincidences life sometimes creates? Then I noticed something else. Marcus kept looking at the stage with unusual focus, almost like he was waiting for someone specific. Then it happened. The announcer stepped to the microphone. "And now," she said proudly, "we would like to recognize this year's valedictorian." The crowd applauded. "And the valedictorian of the graduating class," she paused for dramatic effect, "is Daniel Carter." The applause exploded. My mother grabbed my arm. "That's our boy!" I stood up, clapping with tears in my eyes. Daniel walked confidently toward the stage. And that's when Marcus froze. Because the moment he heard the name, the moment he saw Daniel's face, something in his expression changed completely. Recognition? Confusion? Shock. He stared at Daniel like he was trying to solve an impossible puzzle, because standing on that stage was a young man who looked unmistakably familiar. Marcus leaned forward in his chair,
his eyes locked on Daniel. And in that moment, you could almost see the realization slowly forming in his mind. But the real shock was still about to come, because Daniel Carter was about to give a speech that Marcus Carter would never forget. Daniel stepped up to the podium with calm confidence. The applause slowly faded as the crowd settled back into their seats. Now, if you've ever watched someone you love walk onto a stage like that, you know the feeling. Your heart beats a little faster, your chest fills with pride, and suddenly every memory of their childhood flashes through your mind like a slideshow. Daniel adjusted the microphone slightly, then he smiled at the crowd. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. His voice was steady, clear, strong, exactly like the young man he had grown into. "I know graduation speeches are supposed to be inspiring," he said with a small grin, "so I promise I'll try not to keep you here long enough for your dinner reservations to get canceled." The crowd laughed. Even the principal smiled. But then Daniel's tone softened. "I've been thinking a lot about what brought us all to this moment today. Teachers, friends, late night studying, and families who supported us." As he said the word families, his eyes briefly moved across the audience, and for a second, I wondered if he could somehow sense Marcus sitting there. "But sometimes," Daniel said, "life doesn't give everyone the same starting point." The field grew quiet. You see, some people grow up with two parents cheering them on. Some grow up with one, and some grow up with people who step in and become family when life doesn't go the way you expected. My mother squeezed my hand. Daniel looked down at his speech for a moment, then back up. "When I was younger, I used to wonder what it would be like to have a father around." A ripple of quiet moved through the crowd. "And if I'm being honest, I asked my mom about it more than once." Marcus shifted in his chair. I could see the back of his neck stiffen. "But over time," Daniel said, "I realized something important. Having a parent isn't about biology, it's about presence." The crowd listened closely now, because the person who showed up for every school play, every doctor appointment, every late-night homework meltdown, he paused, then smiled gently, was my mom. The crowd erupted into applause. I covered my mouth, overwhelmed, but Daniel wasn't finished. "I learned something from watching her," he continued, "that strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the person who stays when things get hard. It's the one who doesn't walk away." Marcus lowered his head slightly. Daniel finished his speech with one final sentence. "So if there's one lesson I want to leave with my classmates today, it's this: be the person who stays." The applause this time was thunderous. People stood, clapped, some even wiped their eyes. Daniel stepped away from the podium and shook hands with the principal, but in the middle of that standing ovation, one man wasn't clapping. Marcus. He sat frozen in his chair, his eyes locked on the stage, because in Daniel's face, in the shape of his smile, in the way he carried himself, Marcus was seeing something undeniable: himself. And as the realization finally settled in, Marcus slowly turned his head, scanning the crowd, searching, and then his eyes landed on me, Angela, the woman he left behind, the woman who had raised the son he never knew. And the look on Marcus Carter's face in that moment was something I will never forget. For a moment, Marcus just stared at me, not blinking, not moving, like the world around him had suddenly gone silent. 18 years. 18 years had passed since the night he walked out that door. But in that single glance, every memory seemed to rush back at once. Recognition, shock, regret. All of it written across his face. I held his gaze calmly, not angry, not bitter, just steady. Because time has a way of softening certain wounds, not erasing them, but teaching you how to carry them without letting them control your life. Marcus slowly stood up from his chair. The crowd was still applauding Daniel's speech, so most people didn't notice him turn around. But I noticed, and so did my mother. "He's coming this way," she whispered. Sure enough, Marcus began walking up the aisle, slowly, almost cautiously, like someone approaching a moment they weren't sure they deserved. When he reached our row, he stopped. For a second, none of us spoke. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "Angela?" My name sounded unfamiliar coming from him. 18 years can do that. "Hi, Marcus," I said calmly. His eyes looked slightly red. I I didn't know," he said. His voice cracked a little. "I swear to you, Angela, I didn't know." Now let me tell you something about regret. Real regret doesn't arrive loudly. It shows up quietly, in shaky voices, in lowered eyes, in the realization that time has moved forward without you. Marcus looked back toward the stage where Daniel was now shaking hands with teachers. That's my son, isn't it?" he whispered. I nodded. "Yes." Marcus exhaled slowly, like the truth had finally landed in his chest. "He's incredible," he said. I followed his gaze. Daniel was laughing with his classmates, holding his diploma proudly. "Yes," I said softly. "He is." Marcus looked down at his hands, then back at me. "I missed everything," he said. The words weren't dramatic, they were quiet, heavy. "I missed his first steps, didn't I?" "Yes." "His first day of school?" "Yes." "His birthdays?" "Yes." Each answer landed like another weight on his shoulders. Marcus swallowed hard. "Does he hate me?" That question hung between us. I thought about Daniel, his kindness, his maturity, the way he had grown up without bitterness. "No," I said gently. "He doesn't hate you." Marcus looked surprised. "Really?" "He just doesn't know you. And sometimes that truth hurts more than anger ever could." Just then, Daniel started walking toward the audience with a few friends. Marcus watched him approach. His son, a young man he had never held as a baby, never taught to ride a bike, never helped with homework. Yet somehow, Daniel had still become someone remarkable. Marcus stepped aside as Daniel walked past our row. Daniel stopped when he saw me and my mother. "Mom," he said happily. Then his eyes shifted to Marcus, a polite stranger standing by. Daniel nodded courteously. "Hello, sir." "Sir." Marcus flinched slightly at the word, but he managed a small smile. "Hello, Daniel." And in that quiet moment, Marcus Carter finally understood something he should have realized 18 years earlier. Walking away is easy, but missing a lifetime with your child? That's a regret no amount of success can ever erase. And sometimes, the greatest lesson in life isn't about revenge. It's about becoming so strong that the people who left you behind can only watch in silence as you rise. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. If this story touched your heart, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories about resilience, dignity, and quiet justice. Because some lessons don't come with applause. They come with peace.